tell us about the abduction? It came out of nowhere? Like it was completely just caught you off guard?
At the time, in late 2018, one of my friends from the Marines, he was getting married to a Russian lady. So we had a ceremony here and then went to Moscow to have a ceremony there. It was about 4:30, 5 o'clock. We were getting ready to go to dinner. Another friend of mine came to the hotel room unexpectedly, and it wasn't 100%, abnormal for people to just stop by, say hi when I was in town or whatever. He came in. He's speaking to my other friend who was Russian, and I was in the bathroom actually getting ready. And there's video on the internet of this. It's kind of comical. This guy walks in, and he has a flash drive, and he said, "Hey, these are photos and videos from earlier in the year when you stayed, with my family." And I had stayed with his wife and brother and his parents at their cottage, and we'd taken some photos and videos. I mean, this kind of stuff you would transfer through email or using WhatsApp or what have you. It was nothing, professional or big videos or anything. And I said, okay, whatever. We're standing in the bathroom. He gives it to me. I put it in my pocket. I'd known him for 10 years. I had no reason to doubt him. He was a low-level functionary in the border guard. I knew from the circle of friends that I had, everybody knew each other. And I knew that, he wasn't in the FSB. He wasn't a high-ranking official. He wasn't into anything operational. 5 minutes after he gave me the thumb drive, the door opens with this person opening it. These guys come in. They've got black masks on. They've got vests on. They have guns. They have nothing that says police. Nothing says FSB. Nothing that identifies themselves at all.
Can you tell us what FSB is?
That's the Federal Security Service. It's the modern KGB. And, they changed the name, but they can't change the shame. They grab me. They put me in cuffs. And they say, Mr. Whelan, you're under arrest for espionage. In English. Mm-hmm. And
this is before they see the thumb drive or what's on it. They don't know what's on the thumb drive.
Well, they did because it was all a setup. But I'd never seen the thumb drive. I had never accessed the thumb drive. I didn't have a laptop or anything to access the thumb drive. It was 5 minutes after I'd gotten it. I just walked out of the bathroom, and the friend of mine, they actually let him go a few hours later. So the Russians actually said I was a brigadier general. I was a secret agent, and I worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency. That was their story.
Okay.
Now, what they really think, who knows? For some reason, they put their story together and decided I was the guy.
And so they put that out as propaganda.
Yeah, and the Russians would believe that because they believe anything. But if you think, why would the U.S. send a brigadier general to Russia to get a thumb drive of information, which they said would have been photos and the names of border guard students, so cadets at their border guard school? Why would the U.S. send a general to get that information, right? It could just be sent over WhatsApp or sent over the internet. So, the whole thing fell apart very, very quickly, and, the media debunked it. You see this kind of changing narrative where the Russians are trying to make make me seem important, make the case seem important, and it falls apart. In 2019, when Vadim Krasikov, the FSB assassin, was arrested in Germany, the Russians are like, well, we don't care what we said. We've got him. You've got Krasikov. We want to do an exchange, and Paul's not coming home until we do.
So the motivation behind bogus charges like this, geopolitical leverage for future negotiations.
Within 3 days of my arrest, Ambassador Antonov in D.C. Went to the State Department and said, hey, look, we've got your guy, you've got 3 of ours, we want to do a trade. And Mike Pompeo and John Bolton were involved trying to work out a deal. When Krasikov was arrested, that kind of, muddied the waters a little bit.
How long after your arrest was
Krasikov? It was later in 2019.
Okay.
So about 6-8 months later.
He's got a pretty nefarious background.
Yeah, he's a nasty guy. He was a colonel in the FSB. He was chasing a rebel leader from Chechnya. And Chechnya is a breakaway republic of Russia. They want to be their own country. The assassin Krasikov, he follows this rebel leader. They end up in Berlin in a park, broad daylight with women and children all over the place. And Krasikov just goes up to him and shoots him in the head, kills him. He gets caught. He's in prison. The Germans finally said, okay, the Russians have Navalny, a Russian activist. We want him back, and we'll do this deal. As soon as the Russians said, okay, yeah, you can have Navalny as well as Paul and these, Evan Gershkovich, Wall Street Journal reporter that was also taken. We'll do this deal. A week after they said that they would do the deal, Navalny ended up dead in prison. He was in a secure facility, a high-profile prisoner, and he ends up dead. He's like 46, 47 years old. Obviously, the Russians killed him. They didn't want him out. And they said, okay, well, Navalny's dead. We can still do this deal because we still want Krasikov. But this is the way they do business.
Now, eventually, Russia arrests women's basketball star Brittany Griner.
Yeah.
I remember when this happened, the fact that the White House immediately started talking about negotiating a release of her in exchange for, this nefarious Russian bad guy. I'm like, what about the United States Marine that's there? Why are we talking about just because this lady's a basketball star? Why is this Marine being left out? I mean, when that happened, you're hearing that America's starting to negotiate this release and you're being left behind. What were you thinking?
It was quite difficult. And don't forget that in April of 2022, before the negotiations for Griner, Trevor Reed, a Marine, had been arrested. He was traded on humanitarian grounds for Krasikov. Yurchenko. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. So that had taken place. So the U.S. had 3 people the Russians wanted. Maria Butina was given a light sentence and sent home. So she's out of the picture. There were 2 left. Trevor Reed is traded for Konstantin Yurchenko. So that leaves Victor Bout that the Russians want. And Russia's got Brittany and myself. So the U.S. is saying, well, even though the Russians want Krasikov from Germany, we don't have him. We have Bout. We'll do a 2-for-1. We'll do Paul and Brittany for Victor Bout. And the Russians said, no, we'll trade Paul for Krasikov and we'll trade Victor for Brittany. And the efforts of the U.S. government to dissuade that didn't work, and the trade went through. Brittany for Victor. But that was it was a terrible feeling for me because I knew, and it was widely reported that the U.S. had nothing else that the Russians wanted, and the only thing that could be done was to convince the Germans to give up this assassin to get me home. And
they weren't going to do it.
Yeah, they were saying at first they weren't going to do it.
Yeah.
And then when they agreed with Navalny being involved, the Russians killed Navalny. So that put the whole deal in jeopardy.
You're arrested. You're being held. I mean, it's got to be a journey from going from handcuffs being put on you, the original interview or interrogation, to court proceedings, to actually being in prison.
Yeah.
Take us through that journey.
It was surreal. Mm-hmm. I'm listening to people speaking a foreign language that I don't understand. I have a translator who, she spoke English well enough for me to understand what she was saying and the process. I was being taken from holding cells to interview rooms to courts, and I couldn't have my own lawyer. I could only have the lawyer that the FSB provided. I couldn't say very much. The statements and things that I thought were important weren't important to the judge. Depending on what the FSB said at the time, it was just taken verbatim, and that's the way it was.
Was any physical abuse?
No, but they would do things like come up and kick the chair I was sitting in, or they'd take a water bottle and hit the back of the chair. There was a lot of that kind of stuff. Just stupid things that, when you consider what they're up to, it's like, well, why aren't they hitting me?
Right.
Because they're worried. They knew they couldn't. Mm-hmm. There was too much public attention. One of the funny things they did, they actually took like a slipper and they put it under one of the chair legs of the chair I sat on to make it, off balance. Because if you're sitting in a chair off balance, you might not be paying attention to the questions that are being asked. You're focusing on this chair or whatever. It's an old trick, like the investigator sitting in a chair higher than the person being spoken to. All of those sorts of things they would try. And I just kicked the slipper out of the way. I was like, yeah, good luck. It's not going to work. Probably the funniest thing for us and the not so amused thing for them, it was in September of 2019, and I got in front of the media in court, and I was holding up my signs and everything I would make. And I said, Russia says they've arrested James Bond on a secret mission. But in reality, they've abducted Mr. Bean on holiday. Mm-hmm. Well, Mr. Bean on holiday is a movie. right?
Yeah.
It's funny. There's a little Russian boy named Max in it. Well, everybody on our side of the world laughed at that. Well, the Russians didn't understand it. They had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. Well, when they figured it out, they were really mad. They were really, really mad. And, to the point that they told me so, which is unusual for them. But what they started doing, in my cell at La Fortova, they'd leave bright light on 24 hours a day. And then when I eventually got to the labor camp in Mordovia, for 4 years, every night, every 2 hours, they would come and wake me up and take my photo to show that I hadn't escaped. Although they didn't, hit me during interrogations or use any kind of drugs or, things like that, what they did trying to get back at me was the sleep deprivation. And they sat me down and said, look, we need a confession from you. If we have a confession, we can wrap up this court case. Once that's wrapped up, then we can start, negotiating for a trade. And I said, well, there's nothing for me to confess. What do you want me to confess to? I'm not a spy. I don't work for the U.S. government. I'm nothing, a general, a secret agent, etc. I'm none of that. And they said, well, it doesn't matter. Just put it down on paper. Give us a confession. That's all we need. And then you can go home. This is 2019, in 2020. And I'm like, okay, so I can just go home by confessing to something I didn't do. No, it's not happening. They tried that 6 times and that didn't work. And then, finally they went through with the sham.
Were you tempted at all? Were your mind like, maybe this is the fast way out and just
No,
wrap it up?
no. Well, number one, I didn't trust anything they told me.
Yeah.
I thought, well, if we could speed the process up, then maybe there would be a negotiation after a conviction, because they wanted a conviction to show credibility.
Sure.
But I wasn't going to sign my name to something that I hadn't done, and I knew I hadn't committed espionage. So the trial was a sham. We basically went through the different stages of what should happen. The judge would ask, oh, do you want witnesses? And I said, yes, of course. They've got to come in from other parts of the world. We need visas, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, well, because of COVID, you can't have any. Next. Evidence. You want to see the evidence? I said, yeah, let me see the evidence. He says, we have boxes of evidence. Oh, but it's a state secret, so you can't see it.
What was life like in the labor camps in that prison?
I've been to Dachau and I've been to Auschwitz, and it's that same kind of design. It's that 1930s, 1940s design of German camps. That's what the camps in Russia look like. We lived in military barracks, and we worked in a factory. My camp was an international camp, and it was mainly Central Asians from Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Afghanistan, as well as some Cubans and some Africans. We had 1 or 2 Europeans that came in and out. But for the most part, it was a Central Asian camp, which was interesting. We had a small group of Russians. When the war started with Ukraine, they all went off to the war.
What was that like? I mean, did they know they were being conscripted and pulled?
Most of them didn't want to go. They were apolitical. They didn't like Putin. They didn't like his government. They were young kids, early 20s. A lot of them there for minor drug offenses, which here we would, have given them a ticket, a diversion program. Not in Russia. They'll give you 5 years for a joint of marijuana. 5 years in prison. And it's because all of these prisons are labor camps. And this labor fuels the Russian economy. It fuels the people in charge. One of the problems with Putin is that they have a Victory Day parade every year in Russia, right? It goes through Red Square, and you've got missiles and tanks, and you've got all these soldiers that are marching. And actually, the soldiers that you see marching aren't soldiers. They're cadets from all the different service academies in Moscow area. But they put on a good parade. But that's a World War II parade. It's focused on the victory over the Nazis, the fascists, right? Well, younger kids, they don't have any connection to that war. Their grandparents have passed away. Their parents may have been small children, probably not. And so the war that they would recognize is the Afghan war. But because the Russians lost that's hidden. That's hushed up. Nobody speaks about the Afghan war in Russia. So you've got a parade every year for a victory that the young kids don't even understand. So what's Putin doing? Putin is setting up the next parade. It's going to be the victory in Ukraine parade. And he's sending all of these generations, these young kids, to the slaughter just for the sake of this parade. And so that he can be like Stalin, saying that he overthrew NATO and overthrew the fascists and all this kind of nonsense. It's the same sort of thing. And you know this from being there. The Russian story, their narrative is that the Ukrainians are fascists, just like the Germans were fascists.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable.
A lot of propaganda.
Yeah,
floating around the world that people unfortunately believe the Nazis, Nazism of Ukraine.
And in Russia, it's a crime to speak out against what Putin's doing. So if you say, "Oh, this is an unjust war, this is an illegal war," you go to prison for that in Russia, and from prison you'll be expected to then go and fight the war.
Yes,
it's a crazy system,
which is fascist.